My name is Mark Reynolds. I'm 42 years old, and my story began on a night that changed my life forever. I was sitting alone in my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, when I glanced down at the lottery ticket I had almost thrown away. The numbers on that slip of paper matched every single one drawn on the television screen. In that moment, I wasn't just a man struggling to pay bills anymore. I was holding $62 million in my hands. Backhand index pointing right before I share what happened next. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The first thing I felt wasn't joy. It was fear. My fingers trembled as I held that ticket, the edges damp with sweat. My old house creaked in the wind, and for a second I thought maybe I had misread the numbers. I read them again. Then again. Still the same. $62 million. Enough money to bury every debt I had ever known. Enough to rewrite the course of my entire life. But instead of leaping up or shouting, I sank into my chair and just stared at it, my chest tight. You see, I come from a family where money has always been a weapon. Not a blessing, not a comfort, a weapon. My parents fought over it until their marriage cracked. My siblings kept score. Every borrowed dollar a bullet fired years later in some argument. Even in the smallest things, like splitting the check at a diner, bitterness hung in the air. So as I sat there that night, staring at my winning ticket, I thought about what this fortune would do to them. To us. My wife, Ellen, had gone to bed early. She didn't even know I bought the ticket. I imagined waking her, whispering the truth into her ear. But I stopped myself. Because deep down, I already knew what would happen if I told her. Ellen's family would swoop in like vultures, each one with a hand out. My brothers would call, pretending to check on me, when really, they'd be calculating how much they could squeeze. And my cousins, the same ones who hadn't spoken to me in years, would show up on my doorstep, smiling too wide. No, I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. The next morning, I folded the ticket carefully and tucked it into an envelope. I drove to the bank and slipped it into a safety deposit box. My hands shook as I signed the papers, my voice cracking as I tried to act calm in front of the teller. Just some family keepsakes, I said with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Inside, my heart was racing. I had just locked away the biggest secret of my life. For the rest of that week, I lived two lives. By day, I was the same man everyone knew, Mark. The one who worked long shifts at the hardware store. The one whose boots were always dusty. The one who always borrowed a little gas money until payday. By night, I was a man who held a secret so heavy it almost suffocated me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself, 62 million. It didn't even sound real. And here's the strangest part. Part of me hated it. The weight of it. The temptation of it. I started looking at the people around me differently, almost suspiciously. At Sunday dinner, my younger brother Tom leaned back in his chair, laughing about how broke I always was. He didn't know that I could buy his entire house 10 times over. He didn't know that the joke was on him now. But I didn't laugh. I just chewed my food slowly, wondering if he would even notice if I disappeared tomorrow. Then came the storm. That winter was brutal. Temperatures dropped below freezing, and the heating bill nearly doubled. At night, I could see my own breath in the bedroom. Ellen wrapped herself in blankets, muttering about how we'd barely scrape by until spring. My son, Michael, kept asking if we could turn the heat up, and I told him we had to save every penny. Inside, my heart ached. I had $62 million locked away, and yet I let my family shiver in the cold. Why? Because I needed to know. I needed to know if anyone in my life cared about me for who I was, not for what I had. I couldn't shake the thought. If they knew, they'd only see dollar signs. So instead of fixing the problem with one check, I started making calls. Quiet, careful calls. I phoned Tom first. I told him I was short on the heating bill and asked if he could lend me a couple hundred. His laugh cut me like a knife. Mark, you're always broke. Maybe stop buying junk and start saving for once. Then he changed the subject to his new truck. I hung up, my stomach twisting. Next, I called my sister Diane. She listened quietly, then sighed. Mark, I wish I could help, but you know how tight things are for us. Her voice softened, but there was no offer, no hint of checking in later. Just silence. I sat alone after those calls, the house cold around me, my hands trembling for more than the temperature. That ticket in the bank wasn't just money anymore. It was a mirror showing me who my family truly was. That night, I made a vow. I would not reveal my fortune. Not yet. Not until I finished what I had started. This winter, I would test them. I would find out once and for all who loved me when I had nothing. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the frost on the window pane, and whispered to myself, "Let's see who shows up." The frost on the window was still there the next morning, its icy patterns spreading across the glass like thin cracks in my own heart. I stood in the kitchen, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring at the silent phone on the counter. The decision I made last night felt heavier now. If I was truly going to test my family, it had to start today. I picked up the phone, dialing Tom first. My brother had always been quick with jokes, slow with compassion. The line rang 3 times before his familiar voice answered. "Mark, what's up, man? You finally decided to crawl out of that old house of yours." His laugh echoed through the receiver. I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, hey. Listen, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, but we're struggling with the heating bill this month. It's been so cold. I was wondering if you could lend me a couple $100, just until payday." Silence. Then the sound of him clearing his throat. "A couple $100? Mark, come on. You know how it is. Gas prices, truck payments, the kids' sports fees. We're stretched thin, too." I swallowed hard. "I get it, but it's just temporary. I'll pay you back." He sighed loudly, the kind of sigh that meant the conversation was over. "You gotta learn to manage better, brother. Maybe stop buying things you don't need. Anyway, I gotta run, dinner's on the stove." And just like that, the line went dead. I set the phone down slowly. My fingers drummed against the counter, the sting of his words sharper than the cold creeping through the walls. Tom had forgotten every time I'd helped him move, every time I'd loaned him money in our 20s, when he couldn't keep a job. I wasn't worth $200 to him now. The phone felt heavier the second time I picked it up. This time I called Diane. My sister had always been the more nurturing one, or so I believed. The line clicked, and her soft voice came through. "Hey, Mark. Everything okay?" I hesitated, then forced a smile she couldn't see. "Not really. The heat's barely keeping up. Ellen and Michael are freezing. I was wondering if you could spare a little to help cover the bill this month." Her tone shifted instantly, firmer, guarded. "Mark, you know things are tight here too. We've got tuition coming up for Lisa, and honestly, we're barely making ends meet ourselves. I wish I could, but—" Her voice trailed off. "But you can't," I finished for her. There was a pause. "I'm sorry." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, I understand." We hung up, and the silence afterward was crushing. My chest tightened as I looked around the kitchen. Peeling wallpaper, a flickering light overhead, the sound of the furnace groaning like an old man gasping for breath. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the phone, wondering if I had made a mistake starting this test. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe everyone really was strapped for cash. But then I remembered the last family barbecue, when Diane and her husband had proudly shown off their new boat. The same Diane who now couldn't spare a dime for her brother. I shook my head and dialed again. This time, it was my cousin Jeff. He was the type who always had something going on. New job, new car, new story. When he answered, his voice was loud, upbeat, almost theatrical. "Mark, long time, cousin. What's good?" I forced my way into the conversation. "Not much. Actually, that's why I called. We're having a rough patch, and the furnace is barely working. I was hoping you could help me out, just a little, until I get back on my feet." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Man, you're still in that old house? You should have upgraded years ago. Tell you what, when I win the lottery, I'll buy you a new furnace myself." His laughter filled the line again before I could respond. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just brushed me off like I was a joke. Then he launched into a story about his new fishing gear until I cut him off with an excuse and hung up. I sat there, staring at the wall, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. Each rejection wasn't just a denial of money. It was a denial of me. a refusal to step into my world for even a moment. That night, Ellen asked me if I'd managed to figure out the bill. I lied. I told her I was working on it. She looked tired, her eyes heavy with worry, but she didn't push. She trusted me, even when I didn't trust anyone else. The following day, I decided to try one more time. I called Aunt Margaret, the oldest in the family, the one who always talked about sticking together. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm at first. "Mark, honey, how are you holding up in this weather?" I took a breath. Honestly, not well. The furnace is struggling, and the bills are piling up. I hate to ask, but could you lend a little until things ease up? Her tone changed, colder, like a door slowly shutting. "Oh, Mark, I wish I could, but I've got my own problems, you know. Medicine, groceries, the usual. I'll say a prayer for you, though. That's all I can do. A prayer. That's what my family thought I was worth." Words whispered into the void. When the call ended, I sat in the kitchen again, staring at the frost that hadn't gone away. My breath fogged in front of me. My hands were stiff, my body chilled. But the cold inside me wasn't from the weather. It was from the realization that no one was willing to step forward. That night, lying awake, I listened to Michael coughing in his sleep, the blanket pulled tight around his shoulders. Ellen shifted beside me, her back pressed close, both of us clinging to warmth that wasn't there. My chest ached, but not from the cold, from something deeper. As I stared at the ceiling, I knew this was only the beginning. The test had started, and the results so far were clear. The house was so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of the old clock above the fridge. Every second that passed seemed louder, sharper, like the sound of a nail being driven into wood. Ellen was asleep in the bedroom, Michael's soft coughs echoing through the thin walls. And me, I was sitting in the kitchen again, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring. It didn't. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not the day after that. I had reached out, laid my pride on the line, asked for help that most people could give without thinking twice. But now, with the silence stretching on, the truth became clear. Not one of them cared enough to check back. Not a text. Not a call. Not even a polite message asking, "How are things now?" At first, I told myself they were busy. People get caught up in their own lives. Maybe they forgot. But then I remembered every time they needed me. How quickly I had answered. How fast I had shown up. The memory stung. On the fourth day, I tested the theory. I dialed Tom again, not to ask for money this time, but just to check in. He answered with his usual booming laugh. "Mark, didn't expect to hear from you again so soon." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, just wanted to see how you're doing." "Oh, you know, busy. The kids have tournaments. The truck needs a new set of tires. Same old stuff. Hey, how's your heat holding up?" His question stopped me cold. For a moment, I thought maybe he cared after all. But before I could answer, he cut in. "Don't tell me you still need help. I told you, man. You gotta figure this stuff out on your own." His laugh was quick, almost dismissive, before he rushed to end the call. I set the phone down gently, my pulse heavy in my ears. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't busyness. It was indifference. That night, the furnace sputtered again, coughing out weak bursts of air that did little to warm the house. Ellen tossed and turned beside me, pulling the blanket tighter. I whispered into the dark, words meant only for myself. "We're alone in this." By the end of that week, the silence had grown unbearable. I decided to test the waters differently. I called Diane, not about money, not about bills. Just conversation. "Hey," I said when she picked up. "Haven't talked in a while. Thought I'd check in." Her voice was polite, but distant. "That's nice of you, Mark. Things are busy here, though. Lisa's got finals, and you know how stressful that is. I really can't talk long." I hesitated, hoping she'd ask about me, about my family, about the struggles I'd hinted at days earlier. But she didn't. She wrapped up the call within minutes, her goodbye sharp, almost hurried. I sat staring at the silent phone again. Not a single one of them cared to dig deeper, to ask how I was really doing. They wanted quick exits, clean breaks from responsibility. The silence wasn't just in the phone lines. It seeped into the house itself. Michael came home from school with red cheeks, his breath clouding in the cold air inside our living room. "Dad," he said softly, "why don't we just ask Uncle Tom to help? Or Aunt Diane? They'd want to, right?" I forced a smile, my chest aching. "Sometimes, buddy, people have their own struggles. We just have to push through." He nodded, accepting my words, but I saw the disappointment in his eyes. A child's faith in family was still intact, even when mine was crumbling. Later that night, Ellen confronted me in the kitchen. "Mark, what's going on? You've been quiet, distracted. Did something happen with your family?" I looked at her, the weight of the secret pressing harder. I wanted to tell her everything, that I was sitting on a fortune, that the calls I'd made weren't about survival, but about truth. Instead, I shook my head. "Nothing. Just tired. Just cold." She didn't press further, but the doubt lingered in her eyes. Days turned into a week. The silence from my family was deafening. I decided to push one last test. I called Jeff again, pretending my car had broken down. "Hey, cousin," I said, my voice shaky. "I'm stuck on the side of the road. Any chance you could swing by and give me a ride?" There was a pause, then his laugh. "Man, you're always in a jam. I'd love to help, but I'm heading out for dinner with some friends. Maybe call AAA." His tone was light, carefree, as if my situation was a punchline. I thanked him anyway, hung up, and sat in my freezing car for an hour just to make the lie real to myself. The windows frosted over as I sat there, my hands stiff on the wheel, my mind running in circles. They didn't care. They truly didn't. That night, back home, the bitterness seeped in deeper than the cold. Every sound of the furnace straining was a reminder of the silence outside our walls. Every cough from Michael was an echo of the absence of family support. I realized something then. Silence can be louder than words. Their lack of action, their lack of care, said more than any denial or excuse. It screamed through the phone lines, through the empty driveways, through the unopened doors. I wasn't just alone. I was invisible to them. And as I sat in that silence, with frost creeping along the window panes and my family shivering under blankets, I felt a new fire burning inside me. Not from anger alone, from resolve. The silence had spoken, and I was finally listening. The night after my final call to Jeff, the silence in our home felt heavier than ever. Ellen had gone to bed early, worn down by the endless chill that the furnace could no longer chase away. Michael lay curled beneath his blanket, his small frame trembling every so often in the cold air that seeped through the thin walls. I sat in the living room, staring at the frost blooming across the window pane. Each crystal pattern reminded me of time running out, of the cold tightening its grip on us, and of the bitter truth I had accepted. No one was coming. That was when I heard it, 3 steady knocks on the door. The sound startled me so sharply that I almost jumped from my chair. No one ever came to our door unannounced. Not out here. Not in the middle of winter. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it. Just another trick of my weary mind. But then it came again, firm, deliberate. I stood slowly, my breath fogging in the cold air, and walked toward the door. My hand hesitated on the knob. 100 questions crowded my mind. Who could it be? Why now? When I finally pulled the door open, the frigid wind rushed in, carrying with it a figure bundled in a heavy coat, snow clinging to their shoulders. The porch light flickered, casting uneven shadows across their face. "Evening, Mark," the man said, his voice low, measured. I blinked, stunned. It wasn't Tom or Jeff or any of the people I had been silently hoping would appear. It was someone I hadn't seen in years, an old friend, Daniel. Daniel. My voice cracked with disbelief. He gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's been a long time." I stepped aside slowly, motioning him in. "Yeah, years. What are you doing here?" He brushed snow off his coat, glancing around the room with quiet curiosity. "I was passing through town. Heard some things. Thought I should check in." The words hung heavy in the air. Heard some things. I wanted to ask what exactly he'd heard, but something in his expression stopped me. Ellen emerged from the hallway, tying her robe tighter around her. When she saw Daniel, her eyes widened slightly. "Well, this is a surprise." Daniel nodded politely, his gaze shifting between us. I didn't mean to intrude, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. We all sat in the living room, the three of us wrapped in the faint hum of the struggling furnace. Daniel's eyes lingered on the frost around the window, on the layers of blankets draped across the couch. He noticed the little details, the ones outsiders usually overlooked. Finally, he spoke again. "You've been reaching out, haven't you? To your family." The words sliced through me. My chest tightened, my throat dry. "You heard about that?" He nodded. "People talk. Not always kindly. I figured I should hear your side before I believed anything." My pulse quickened. "And what are they saying?" Daniel hesitated, then met my eyes. "That you've fallen on hard times. That you're desperate." He softened his tone. "That you're asking for help you shouldn't need." The shame hit me like a wave. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the truth was too tangled to explain in a single breath. Instead, I asked, "And what do you think?" Daniel leaned back, folding his arms. "I think there's always more to the story, and I think you wouldn't be asking unless you really needed it." Ellen spoke up then, her voice firmer than I expected. "We didn't invite him here to judge, Daniel. If you came to gloat or spread gossip, you can leave." Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I didn't come for that. I came because I know what silence feels like, Mark. I know what it's like when people you thought you could count on turn their backs." His words carried a weight I hadn't expected. For the first time that week, I felt something stir in my chest. Not anger, not bitterness, but a faint flicker of recognition. I studied him, really studied him. The lines on his face were deeper, his eyes tired. He wasn't the same Daniel I remembered. Something had changed in him, too. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Listen, I can't fix everything, but I can listen. Tell me what's going on, really." The words were simple, but they cracked something open inside me. For days, I had been begging for anyone, to care enough to ask that question. Now here he was, an unexpected visitor, offering what no one else had, his ear. I told him pieces of it. How the furnace was failing, how the bills piled up, how the silence from family hurt worse than the cold. I didn't tell him everything, not yet, but enough for him to understand the weight pressing down on us. He listened without interruption, his face steady, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, the silence between us felt different, less bitter, more thoughtful. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You've been carrying this alone. That's not fair. No one should have to." Ellen crossed her arms, skeptical. "And what are you suggesting?" Daniel hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Let me help. Not with money. Don't look at me like that, but with something better. Connections. People who don't turn their backs when it matters. I know a few folks who'd want to help, no strings attached." The offer hung in the air like a fragile flame. I wanted to believe him, wanted to let hope in, but distrust still lingered. "Why now, Daniel?" I asked quietly. "After all these years, why show up tonight?" He looked me straight in the eyes, his voice steady. "Because I know what it feels like to freeze in silence, and I swore I'd never let someone else go through it alone if I could help." His words pierced deeper than I expected. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ice inside me begin to thaw. Not from the furnace, not from blankets, but from something far rarer, genuine care. And as the wind howled outside and frost clawed at the windows, the silence inside our home began to shift. It wasn't warm yet, but it wasn't bitter anymore. It was waiting. The night had stretched longer than any I could remember. My mind was already heavy with unanswered questions, and my body felt drained from the endless cycle of waiting, watching, and doubting. I sat at the wooden kitchen table, the same place where my grandfather used to count coins late into the night. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the silence that wrapped around me. Then, suddenly, I heard it. The click of the old study door opening. My heart jumped. That room had been locked for years. I froze, listening carefully. Slow, dragging footsteps moved across the creaky floor. A chill ran through me. Not just from the draft that slipped under the doorway, but from the feeling that this was the moment I had been stumbling toward all along. I pushed back my chair, its legs scraping against the tile like a scream in the silence, and I walked toward the study. My fingers shook as I turned the knob. Inside, the air smelled of dust and paper, mixed with something metallic, like old coins. The lamp on the desk was already lit, and sitting there, bent over a stack of yellowed letters, was my grandfather. His thin frame looked even smaller under the dim light, and for a moment I felt a pang of sorrow. This was the man who raised me, the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, how to fish, how to shake hands firmly. But as his eyes lifted and met mine, I saw something I had never noticed before: fear. "Ethan," he whispered, my name breaking in his throat. "You weren't supposed to see this." My chest tightened. I wasn't supposed to see what? I stepped closer, and the letters on the desk came into focus. They weren't just old notes. They were legal documents, some with seals, others with signatures, property deeds, bank transfers, names I didn't recognize. I reached for one, but he slammed his frail hand down on the paper. "No." His voice cracked, the sound both sharp and desperate. "You think you want the truth, but you don't. It will destroy you." I swallowed hard. "It's already destroying me, Grandpa. The whispers, the half-truths, the locked doors. I can't keep living in this shadow. If there's something I need to know, say it now." For a long time, he just stared at me, his lips trembling, his eyes glistening with tears he didn't want to release. Then he sighed, his shoulders sagging as though he had carried a weight too heavy for too long. Slowly, he slid one letter across the desk toward me. With shaky hands, I opened it. The handwriting wasn't his. It was my father's. My breath caught as I read the words, simple but crushing. "The fortune is not ours. It was taken, buried in silence, built on lies. And when Ethan is old enough, he deserves to know." I felt like the ground slipped from under me. My father, gone for years, had left this message, and my grandfather had buried it. All the secrets, all the silence, were meant to keep me from this truth. Tears burned my eyes as I looked up at him. You knew all along." He shook his head, hands trembling. "I didn't want you to hate him, or me, or the family name. I wanted you to live free from it." His voice cracked, breaking the walls he had built. But freedom bought with lies is no freedom at all. The clock on the wall ticked louder, every second hammering in my chest. For a moment I couldn't speak. My whole childhood flashed before me. The stories he told, the values he preached, the quiet evenings where he stared at nothing for hours. Now I understood. The silence had never been peace. It had been guilt. I whispered, "Why didn't you tell me when he died? Why wait until now?" Grandpa's shoulders shook as he leaned back, tears spilling down his wrinkled cheeks. "Because I thought I could carry it to my grave. But when you started digging, when you wouldn't stop asking, I knew the truth would outlive me if I didn't share it. And maybe, Ethan, maybe you're strong enough to bear it." The room spun with the weight of his confession. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. This wasn't just about money or land. It was about betrayal, legacy, and the cracks that ran through generations. I had been chasing whispers of fortune, but what I found was far heavier than wealth. It was the truth that my family had been running from, one that would never let me see them the same way again. I folded the letter back slowly and placed it in front of him. "I don't care about the money," I said quietly. "I just needed to know. I needed the silence to end." For the first time, relief flickered across his face. He leaned forward and gripped my hand, his touch weak but trembling with sincerity. "Then you are stronger than I ever was. Promise me one thing, Ethan. Don't let this break you the way it broke us." The lamp flickered, the shadows on the wall shifting like restless spirits. I looked at the frail man before me, my grandfather, both my protector and my betrayer, and I realized he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for release. I took a deep breath and nodded. "I promise." His hand fell back onto the desk, and he leaned into the chair with a deep sigh, as though he had been holding his breath for years. And in that silence, for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt clarity. The truth hadn't destroyed me. It had set me free. As I walked out of the study, the night air felt different. The cold didn't bite the same way. The weight in my chest had shifted, not gone, but lighter. The house no longer felt like a prison of secrets. It felt like a place where the final page of a story had finally been turned. And to you listening now, maybe you felt the sting of silence in your own family, the weight of unspoken truths. Maybe you know what it's like to live with shadows. But here's what I've learned. The truth, no matter how heavy, is always better than the silence. So I share this with you, hoping you find the courage to face your own revelations. And if this story touched you even a little, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that need to be heard the most.